All right. So, welcome everyone. My name is Aurelio Maraca. I'm the technology program coordinator here at the Danbury Library. I'm not actually at the Danbury Library. I'm actually speaking from my own secure location somewhere in Connecticut. And we have for us today for the Western Connecticut UFO Conference for 2025, Michael Schratt. And Michael Schratt is also speaking to us from a location not in the country, hopefully secure. And we welcome him today for his presentation, the UFO Magical Mystery Tour. And on behalf of the Friends of the Danbury Library, we welcome you here, Michael Schratt. Thank you.
Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to join all of you today. Great. So should we launch into it?
Let's go. And again, anyone who has any questions, please feel free to type it in the chat, and I will relay it to Michael at the end of the presentation.
Sounds good. So again, thanks for everyone for giving me the opportunity to join all of you today. What I want to do for you today is give you a brief overview of some of the obscure, forgotten, and lost UFO encounters within this whole field of ufology. Now, since this is kind of my fourth presentation here, I absolutely do not want to cover the same cases over and over again. I want to cover new material here. That's what we want to do with this presentation. We want to cover some new cases here. The title of this lecture is UFO Magical Mystery Tour, and I'm going to start with this slide right here. A couple of quick announcements here. So the visual aids used in this presentation are computer-generated forensic composite illustrations which originated from actual UFO case files and eyewitness reports. So what I want to do is give you the references, the names, the dates, the locations, so that you can verify this on your own. This is where I'm getting the information. CUFO, Center for UFO Studies, NICAP, APRO, MUFON, Invisible Residence by Ivan T. Sanderson, Uninvited Guest by Richard Hall, National UFO Historical Records Center, UFO News Clipping Service, Gray Barker UFO Collection, Boots on the Ground Research. So just to provide the references of where I'm getting this information so everyone can verify this on their own here. And let's kind of jump into the material here. So the question really is, did the ancient Egyptians report sightings of UFOs, thousands of years ago? We've heard some rumors, some speculation, but is there any way to pin any of this down? That took a little digging to verify. But in this book by Jacques Vallée, Wonders in the Sky, Unexplained Aerial Objects from Antiquity to Modern Times, they have a reference here that I want to go over really quickly. And this is 1347 BC, El Armana, Nile River Valley, Egypt. Akhenaten's flying disc says Pharaoh Akhenaten had a unique experience that was to shape Egyptian history. According to the inscription on the frontier stela found on the circumference of El Armana, Akhenaten was strolling along the river, admiring the splendors of nature one summer morning, when he looked up and saw, quote, a shining disc descend from the sky. So here we got all the way back to 1347 BC. Apparently, we've got UFOs being reported and sighted here. Now, did the ancient Romans have sightings of UFOs as early as 100 BC? That's the question we want to ask. And how do we verify that? I came across this document right here, which I thought was very interesting. UFOs of the Roman days were shields. And this is from Evening Star, June 14th, 1959. It says, even the ancient Romans of 2,000 years ago saw flying saucers, but they liked them to flying shields. This is probably the meaning of a passage in a work by Julius Obsequens, a 4th century Latin poet, says Nobby Railsback, a classic scholar from Moline, Illinois, who is studying in Rome. He says he came across this sentence in one of the writings referring to a phenomenon reported observed near Rome in 100 BC. Quote, at sunset, a circular object like a shield was seen to sweep across the sky from west to east. So here we've got reports from the ancient Egyptians, the ancient Romans. This is going back thousands of years here, so this is not a new phenomenon. So is this what they reported in ancient Rome, 100 BC? Is this what they were looking for? So this is my AI generated illustration, just to give you an idea of what they may have seen. Let's go on here. October 12th, 1796, and this is part of the Otto Binder reports here. On Columbus Day, over 170 years ago, Canadian observers reported an astonishing fleet of airships, UFOs with portholes and visible occupants sailing over the Bay of Fundy from the Pacific Stars and Stripes. So here we've got 1796. UFOs with occupants are being reported. This is long before Wright brothers in 1903. So we've got things going 1796. Here's our full color rendering. Gives you an idea what they may have seen at that time. This one I really like. November 13th, 1833. A crowd on both the American and Canadian side saw a peculiar square-shaped UFO hover over Niagara Falls for an hour, after which it sped away toward the ocean. So my question is, who's building these as early as 1833? What intelligence is involved in this? Where people on both sides saw this thing for an hour and then it sped away at a high rate of speed. 1833. Here's our full color rendering. So you can imagine what this may have looked like if you were there at that time. Let's continue on. July 1868, villagers in Campejo, Chile, were frightened by a giant armor-plated machine covered with steel scales whose twin searchlight eyes stabbed down brilliantly. So this is 1868. You've got these winged vehicles with beaming spotlights coming down. Back in 1868, who's building these as early as 1868? Here's our full color rendering. This gives you an idea of what that may have looked like all the way back to 1868. Now, this one I think is really interesting. 19th century's most outstanding sightings was in 1874 at Oaxaca, Mexico, where a giant trumpet hovered in the sky, swinging gently for 6 minutes, observed by many stunned people. 1874, they have a trumpet hovering over Oaxaca, Mexico, with multiple witnesses. So I took all the information from this report. I fed this into AI, and I came up with this illustration. So is this what they saw in 1874? Something that looks similar to this. Let's continue on here. So here we have UFO sightings dating back to 1896. This is the famous 1897 mystery airship wave. So we can't have a UFO discussion without talking about and covering the 1897 mystery airship wave. And let's see what we can find out here. Look at the reference material here. This is the San Francisco Sunday morning, November 29th, 1896. And in this report, it talks about how the mayor saw this as well. So we have multiple credible reports. Let me blow this up a little bit. We'll do an enhancement. And you can kind of see, looking from the Capitol, they saw this mystery airship wave with beaming spotlights coming down. Let's bring this into AI. We'll see what we can come up with here. Something like this may have been seen at that time, 1896, 1897 time frame. And this is exactly what the people are reporting. When you look at the amount of witness reports, the amount of sightings and newspaper clippings, it goes into the thousands. Something was being seen. And when you take all of the detailed reports and articles about the 1897 mystery airship wave, and you feed all that into AI, these are the kind of illustrations that you're going to run up to. This is what it's going to create. So you've got this flying craft. Many times there was a wing on either side, there was a rudder, and then there was beaming spotlights coming down. There were eccentric, well-dressed inventor types wearing top hats. There were big black dogs seen on the deck of these ships. There was laughter coming from these ships, and there were anchors being lowered from the bottom of the craft. Let me go on here. That's what was reported within the newspaper clippings. This is another rendering based on the eyewitness testimony in the newspaper clippings. We'll do a couple more. So again, we need to ask, who's building these? Where did the technology come from? And how did they get the power source to illuminate the searchlights that were shining down on the city below back in 1896 timeframe? We'll do a couple more here. And we need to look at this. Linda Zimmerman has done some really good work on these early 1900 cases. So that's another thing. Is there a correlation between the early 1900 cases and the 1896 cases? We can make an argument for that. Walter Bosley has done a fantastic job pinning down a lot of these old cases here. So we'll do one more. Again, this is what was reported within the newspaper clippings. These beaming spotlights just, they don't end. And you can imagine people were screaming and they were yelling and covered wagons were being flipped over and there was chaos in these towns. That's exactly what the newspaper clippings talk about. So here is the Flying Cucumber of 1903. References Fate magazine, March 1971. This took place March 17th, 1903 in Indiana. And you can see this young girl is shocked by this strange craft flying over her house. This is a multiple witness case. So if you feed this into AI, they're going to end up with something that looks like this. So what was going on? Who was building these things at that time? We need to look and investigate this. Next one, got this from the International UFO Historical Records Center. And this is at Bessemer, Alabama in 1937. My father and several other people saw a UFO. According to my father, it looks something like this. And he's got this sketch here. This is 1937. So if we feed this into AI, we're going to get something that looks like this. Back in 1937, these things are being reported. Foo Fighters, our latest. Pilots flying over Germany at night report that strange balls of fire are following them around on their missions. They have christened these strange phenomenon Foo Fighters. This is Newcastle Sun, January 3rd, 1945. So what I wanted to do in the beginning of this presentation is just to demonstrate that June 24th, 1947, Kenneth Arnold sighting is not the origin point of the modern day UFO phenomenon. It dates back a lot earlier than that. Let's continue on here. So this is what's being reported by our Allied B-17 pilots flying over Berlin in 1944. So you've got these 5-foot diameter disc-shaped craft, almost spherical, that are red, orange, and yellow in color. They fly around the squadron of B-17s and then they peel away. So this is within the European theater of war. So not only the B-17 pilots, but the B-24 pilots also reported similar phenomena. They were reporting the Foo Fighters. And even in the Pacific theater, American B-29 bombers encountered Foo Fighters over Tokyo on May 23rd, 1943. So we've got the European theater of war, we've got the Pacific theater. They're reporting the same phenomenon, and this is back in 1943 timeframe. So if we go into some of the historical sketches that I was able to pull up from the APRO files, and that is part of the National UFO Historical Records Center in Rio Rancho, New Mexico. This is an original sketch from the primary eyewitness, and I'm not going to read all these bullet items here, but this is 1950 to 1951 timeframe, 10:30 p.m., and this is Rhode Island is the location. And what you see here is his original sketch. You've got this orange corona discharge wrapped around the outer circumference. There are seams that you can see on the outer rim of this craft. You can also see the rivets or fasteners. There's porthole windows here. I'm going to do a blow up here, and we'll go into what he talks about on his side notation here. And this is what he says. Construction looked man-made, such as an airplane is built. So even he believes that this is not alien, this is not extraterrestrial, this is one of ours. This is his assessment that these are being built here in America or another country at the very minimum. So if we feed that sketch directly into AI, we're going to get something that looks like this. And that's really what we need to examine. Have the defense contractors made a breakthrough as early as October 1957? This dates prior to that. So it looks like the technology dates even earlier here. This is another version based on the original sketch. And then let me take you to my AutoCAD drawing. This shows you a top view and side view. And this was about 50 to 70 feet across. Rhode Island is the location. And you can see around the outer circumference rim, the fasteners, you see the seams. It's screaming a man-made technology. Let's continue on. So how do we tell the difference? How do we tell which ones are man-made and which ones are possibly ET? So I came up with a list here. I'm going to rip through this real quick. So if you have a man-made UFO, it's going to exhibit these features. Number one, seams, panels, Zeus fasteners, hex head bolts, rivets, socket head cap screws, tubes, pipes, and cylinders on the bottom of the craft. Now, talking about the tubes, pipes, and cylinders, they were reported in the Hudson Valley boomerang wave, 1982 to 1989. They were reported in the Southern Illinois Triangle case, that's January 5th, 2000. They were also reported in the Belgium Triangle wave, that would be 1989 to 1990 in Belgium. All three of these cases reported tubes, pipes, and cylinders on the bottom of the craft. Prongs and protrusions with spheres at the end of them. Okay. Over the years, I've collected probably 24 cases of UFOs with a steel rod coming out and then a sphere at the end. And I'm assessing this as a static electrical discharge sphere. That's what I believe that these are. When you see a pole with a sphere at the end of them coming out of a UFO, it is some type of static electrical discharge sphere. Next bullet item, static electrical disturbances. Okay, so we want to talk about CE2 effects, close encounters of the second kind. So if you have a car engine going out, if you have the lights conking out in your vehicle, if you have something where the engine goes out, the lights goes out, static electrical localized feel where the hair on your hands and the hair on your head sticks up and starts cracking, that's a static electrical disturbance, which could be a close encounter of the second kind. Also static on the radio as well. Multiple colored lights that flash in a repeating sequence. That happened in the Hudson Valley boomerang case. High-pitched drilling noise. The sound of bees hissing or snakes or frying bacon. That's what was also reported. Associated with high voltage electrical charges. So if you see any one or multitude of these bullet items within a UFO sighting, there's a possibility it could be one of ours. Next one, and all these are in numerical order by date. June 17th, 1952, Hasselbeck, Germany. So we have the mayor of Hasselbeck, Germany with his granddaughter, and they were on a motorcycle. The motorcycle stopped running. So they got off and started pushing it down toward the town. And it was the young girl that saw something in a field. And she originally thought there were two deer there. But as they got closer, these were two 4-foot humanoid looking beings wearing a sort of a wrinkled spacesuit that was silver in color all the way up to their necks. It looked like they were picking some grass. And at least one of them had a camera device on its chest and was moving back and forth like it was taking photographs of our biology, our plant life, which pops up multiple times. Now, this thing was 49 feet in diameter. It had a double row of slots wrapped around the outer circumference, and there was a black-colored conning tower at the top of this. This is June 17th, 1952. Let me go again. Here's the next newspaper clipping article that talks about this, a close encounter from East Germany. And then you can see these double row of slots wrapped around the outer circumference. Now, when the two beings noticed they were being watched, they climbed up on the rim of the disc, and then they jumped up onto this pedestal. The pedestal went down. I'm going to go on to the next slide here. Here's Oscar and Gabriella Linke. These are the two primary witnesses that saw this. So I'm going to move on to their original sketch here. And you can see the two beings that they saw. And once that conning tower pushed through the center of the craft, it pushed all the way down, lifting the craft off the ground. And then there was a double row of flames coming out of the outer circumference of the craft itself, and then this thing flew away at a low rate of speed. So the question we want to ask is there any verified newspaper clippings to back this up? This is my good friend Rudy Gardea, who did a great drawing of this thing. So you can see this thing taking off here. This is what it looks like as it was leaving. That conning tower went all the way through the bottom to the underside, and they could see it on the bottom of the vehicle. Here is the sworn affidavit, July 1st, 1952. The CIA also did some research in it. So this is dated 23rd August, 1952. They had a whole article about this. Newspaper clippings, Times Tribune, July 2nd, 1952. Flying saucer takes off in red zone forest. They go into this setting in great detail. This is another one. Charlotte Observer, July 2nd, 1952. West is checking refugee story about flying saucer. So there's some really good documented evidence to back this particular case up. Now, I also want to move on to this case, which I don't think has got enough coverage. Even the tremendous work by Frank Ficino, this case needs to get more coverage. This is Flatwoods Monster, September 12th, 1952. We had a virtual invasion back on September 12th, 1952. Something was going on. There were these burning egg-shaped craft that were coming over multiple states. This isn't just one isolated event. But this one landed on the top of a hill, and we had multiple witnesses. I'm going to move on to the next slide here. You can see Mrs. May with at least 6 other primary witnesses. They brought a flashlight. There was a dog with them. They climbed up this low, rolling, mountainous hill. And when they got to the top, something absolutely shocking and horrifying changed their life forever. Unbelievable, just incredible. What did they see? Something that looks like this, at least 12 feet tall, 4 feet in diameter at the bottom, a silver metallic mechanical craft or being with a black spade-shaped helmet on top. There was a cutout window exposing a red spherical head with 2 orange/green beaming spotlights coming out. Just below the collar section, there were 2 prongs sticking out that looked like antennas. And then on the bottom, there were these fluted tubes that looked like dowel rods connected to the bottom of the craft with this exhaust coming out of the bottom. So I did a lot of discussing this with Frank Ficino. I came up with this particular illustration. We worked all together. So it was me and Frank, my good friend Joel Payne. We looked at the case again. We came up with this full color rendering. You can imagine seeing this back in 1952 would be absolutely shocking. So of course I had to do a 3-view drawing of it, put this into SolidWorks. I did a full color rendering in addition to a 3D model. So again, I want to go over the dimensions: 12 feet tall, 4 feet in diameter. Let me take you to my 3D model here. This gives you an idea of what this particular craft looked like back on September 12th, 1952. This is about a 40-degree look down angle on the 3D model here. Here's Frank Ficino. He's the principal investigator. He's poured 30 years of his life into his research effort on this particular case. This is the actual oak tree where Mrs. May and the 6 other boys encountered that craft. So this is, you can see it's dilapidated, it's deteriorating, but just want to show you Frank in his element here. This is his book, The Braxton County Monster. He just did a brand new one. So that just recently was published. And so if you want to get more information on this, I highly recommend Frank Ficino's book on the case. Now we want to talk about astronaut Gordon Cooper. He had a UFO sighting back in 1951, but the one we want to talk about is the UFO landing at Edwards Air Force Base in 1957. So 1957. It's talked about in great detail in his book, Leap of Faith. So if you want to get more information, definitely check out his book, Leap of Faith. Let's go into the case here. So here we have, according to Gordon Cooper, they were setting up precision landing gear at Edwards Air Force Base back in 1957. All of a sudden, about a 25-foot diameter dish-shaped craft hovered over the dry lake bed. It extended these landing gear legs. The craft sat itself on the dry lake bed, sat there for about 60 seconds, hovered back up, lifted over the dry lake bed, landing gear legs retracted into the bottom of the craft, and then the craft flew away at a slow rate of speed. Now, here's the interesting part. Since they were setting up precision landing gear equipment, they had multiple cameramen on the site, and they caught the whole thing on motion picture film reel camera. This is documented. This is absolutely referenced. There does exist a motion picture film of this event, 100%. Let's move on to the next slide here. So this is Corvallis Gazette Times, October 11th, 2004. It says, Cooper saw the film as soon as it was rushed through the development process. It was a typical circular shaped UFO, he recollected. Not too many people saw it because it took off at quite a sharp angle and it just climbed straight out of sight. He reviewed the film a dozen times before it was forwarded to Washington, never to resurface. So this does exist. This film does exist. Why isn't the Pentagon declassifying and releasing this film into the public domain? This could go into congressional hearings and we would be on our way to disclosure. Let's continue on here. Now, next case I want to go over is this case, which I think is just amazing. This is Maurice Mass, July 1st, 1965, Valençol, France. This is an actual photograph of the primary eyewitness standing in his lavender field. He was checking out some lavender plants. He heard some commotion in back of him. He turned around, and what he saw was something that looks very similar to this. This is a rugby football looking craft with 6 landing gear legs coming down. There was a conning tower that connected the bottom of the craft to the ground. There was an entryway hatch and then a cockpit section that tapered back to the aft of the vehicle. Let's move on to the next slide here. Here's the rendering of what the craft looked like. Now, near the craft, there were 2 humanoid-looking beings. They were 3.5 to 4 feet tall, wearing a one-piece tight-fitting flight suit. They had oversized heads, oversized eyes, slit for a mouth, minute nose, and they were looking at plants, the lavender plants. So this is the second time we've heard about this now. For some reason, these beings, wherever they're from, have taken an interest in our biology. It's absolutely 100% confirmed at this point. Now, while all this is going on, Maurice Mass is looking at these 2 beings. One of them picked up what looked like a dowel rod, about 2 inches in diameter, 18 inches long, pointed it in the direction of Maurice Mass, and then some type of wave came out, which put him into a state of stasis where he couldn't even move. But he was conscious. He saw the 2 beings jump into the entryway hatch, and then the craft lifted off the ground and departed. So he saw the entire thing, even though he couldn't even move his body. So let me take you to the full color rendering. We took everything from the witness report, the newspaper clippings, the illustrations. We came up with this. Go to the next one here, but this is Boston Globe, July 8th, 1965. Flying saucer or secret plane. They go into this case in very good details. This is the French translation of the original newspaper clipping. The flying saucer of Valençol would ultimately be just a story to be told in the evening. They go into this in great detail. And so here is the full color rendering. This is by Joel Christopher Payne. Want to give him credit. But this gives you an idea of what this may have looked like back in 1965. So again, who's building these? Who's flying these? What is the intelligence behind them? That's questions that we really need to ask here. Next one, Platteville, Illinois. This is January 25th, 1969. This is a very good CE2 case. Now, if you look to the lower left where they have the star, that's where this all went down, January 25th, 1969. Here's the map that shows you. This is from the APRO files. This gives you the exact location of where it went down. This is about a 4-page report. They give you the names, the dates, the locations. We'll move on to the next slide here. Here's the map. And the primary eyewitness was driving northbound on Church Road, Platteville, Illinois. where the husband was in the passenger side and he was sleeping. Now take a look at the X, okay? Just a little bit north on Church Road and off to the right. X marks the spot where she saw the UFO. I'm going to move on to the next slide here. This gives you the exact location of where all this went down. This is at night. And the question we want to talk about here is flying ice cream cones and teepees. Yes, there seems to be some type of cone-shaped UFO that look like ice cream cones. Here is the original sketch from the witness that saw this. So this is about a 30-foot tall cone-shaped UFO that had what looked like on the top of a roof, you've got this tiling. That's exactly what this looked like. Now, one of these tiles was kind of tipped out and open, and it had an I-beam structure on the bottom of the craft itself with a large white light. Let me go take you to the cleaned up AutoCAD drawing, which gives you a real good estimate of what this thing looks like. So we're talking about 30 feet high, 10 feet in diameter, with roofing tiles around the outer circumference of the craft itself. Now, the eyewitness basically put on the brakes and the craft tipped up at about a 20-degree angle, allowing her to see the bottom of the craft with the I-beam and the white light. This was the vehicle that they were driving. This is a 1966 Chrysler Imperial. Now, while all this is going on, this UFO came next to the vehicle, and you can see how heavy this vehicle is. This is a Chrysler Imperial. This is a very heavy vehicle. When the craft got near the front end of the Chrysler Imperial, it actually lifted up the two front wheels about 3 feet off the pavement. At this point, the husband woke up. He could not believe what he was seeing. Let me go to the next slide. This will give you an idea from Rudy's drawing, which shows you what the craft looks like, pulling up the two front wheels of the vehicle. And you can imagine what this would have been looking like back at that time frame. Here is our full color rendering that gives you an idea of what this may have looked like. Can you imagine just encountering this? So this is a very good case. Let's go back to Jalen Hynek's chronology. So if you have a close encounter of the first kind, it's a visual sighting, a white light in the sky. If you have a close encounter of the second kind, it's some type of physical effects, tree branches breaking, static on the radio, car engines going out. Close encounter of the third kind is when you have some type of interaction with an entity or a being. Next one. Now, I've covered this one before, but I think I want to cover it again because we got some new information. This is January 1st, 1970, British Columbia, Canada. Doreen Kendall, who was a nurse at the time, she was at the hospital. This is the third floor at night. She's going around making the rounds at the hospital, and she notices that one of her patients was getting restless. So she went over to the window, opened up the blinds, and looking directly out the window, she sees this. This is a rough sketch, one of the original rough sketches. And you can kind of see her looking out the window. She sees a 50-foot diameter dish-shaped craft with a transparent dome on top, tipped up toward her at about a 15-degree angle. I'm going to move on to the next slide. This is a much clearer illustration. Now, there were two 6-foot-tall beings wearing a one-piece tight-fitting flight suit that covered their whole bodies up to their wrist and over to the top of their heads, but their faces were exposed. One of them was facing toward the witness. The other one was faced toward a display panel that had buttons and switches and dials onto the display panel. Both of them were standing next to what looked like bar stools. Now, when the one on the left noticed he was being watched by the nurse, Doreen Kendall, he turned around, he tapped the shoulder of the other being, and then this guy, if you look closely here, he pulled this lever back and forth 3 times, and then this craft flew away at a low rate of speed. Here is my full color rendering based on the original sketch, and you can imagine the shock that this nurse had back in 1970. This is the technical layout drawing that gives you an idea of what the whole scene looked like. Very good technical layout drawing that I don't think has been seen for over 50 years. Here's the AR rendering. You can see the tip-up angle here. This is what it looked like at the hospital around 9:30 p.m. at night. And then here is the blow-up of the detail of the interior. So you've got the two beams, you've got the two bar stools, you've got the display panel with the buttons and the dials, and you've got that lever that was pulled back and forth. This is the original sketch and three-page report by Doreen Kendall. And I'm not going to read everything here, but let me just go over a couple things here. She says, the inside is tipped toward me and looking into same. And then she says, the instrument panel was larger than shown, as the first man was at the controls, consisted of large and small circles brilliantly lit up. She did a great job. She did a fantastic job. You can see the craft. This is the upper right. She's got the detail view. She's even got the bar stools and what she called a joystick. So I think that's very interesting. Let's continue on. So I've got a world exclusive for everybody here. And I'm going to move on to the next slide. And this is a drawing, pencil drawing that I discovered at the National UFO Historical Record Center. This is in Rio Rancho, New Mexico. I don't think this sketch has been seen for over 50 years. It's been buried within the archives and has not been seen. But you can see Doreen looking out this window. You've got a 50-foot diameter disc-shaped craft with the two beings inside. Let me do a blow up here, which will give you a little bit of a better detailed view. Something like this was seen by a hospital worker. I mean, why would she lie? I think she's a very reliable witness here. This is a detailed view of the pencil drawing, showing you the two beings and the bar stools. And then I took everything from the witness report from Doreen Kendall, all of the sketches, and we came up with this drawing. So I want to give credit to Rudy Gardea. This one shows the display panel in much greater detail. And this is our final full color rendering based on the original sketch and report from Doreen Kendall. Newspaper clipping to back this up. Times colonists, January 5th, 1970. Human-like pair in saucer, and they go into this. This is about a 3-page newspaper article that goes into the case in great detail. Next one, November 1972, 3.5 miles south of Corrales, New Mexico. The star marks the location of where the sighting took place. And I think it's very interesting. This is the original sketch. So you've got this faceted UFO that shines this beaming spotlight on a motorcycle rider. This is about 1:30 in the morning. He finished his work shift driving home. This beaming light came out from the bottom forward of the craft and froze him exactly where he was. He could not move. Let's go on to the next one. This is my SolidWorks drawing based on the original sketch report. So I modeled the whole thing up in SolidWorks. And then this is the original sketch illustration that came with the report. So there's about a 2-page report that goes into this case in great detail. Let me go to the next slide. And this is Joel Christopher Payne's illustration. I want to give him credit, but this gives you a real good idea of what this looked like. Now I want to talk about the CE2 effects. The witness reported that his motorcycle engine died and he could feel the hair on his body stand on end, then slowly extending a white-blue light that paralyzed him. So you've got the motorcycle engine dying, and it says that he could feel the hair on his body stand on, and so there was a localized static electrical field right around the local area here. Next one, November 9th, 1975, 25 miles south of Young, Arizona. And this is, believe it or not, the original sketch from the witness. So what are we looking at here? How do you make any sense of what this witness is describing and has drawn for us? Well, the good thing is there was a 5-page report with this case, and there were multiple sketches. So we had to go through the whole case in great detail. And this is her driving her car down the road. Off to the right, this craft is hovering over the ground about 2 feet. And you can see she's got some dimensions here. She goes into detail of what she saw on this dirt road. This is another couple of her sketches, and she says 40 to 50 feet across would be my estimate. So we're looking at something about 50 feet in diameter. She said that the forward interior middle section popped out of the other portion of the craft, looking like some type of you could call it an opera banister or something that was protruding from the center of the craft itself. So here's Rudy's drawing of what the craft may have looked like. You've got all these lights on the outer circumference of the craft itself, and then the center part that's sticking out. Here's my first pass full color illustration that gives you an idea of what the primary eyewitness may have seen. And then this is Joel Christopher Payne's illustration. Want to give him credit. So you can see as we go through these cases, a lot of the configurations are different, but they all have CE1 and CE2 effects in many cases. Elmwood, Wisconsin, April 22nd, 1976. Star matched the location of where this case actually took place. And this is what the primary eyewitness reported seeing. This is 250 feet in diameter. This is not a small craft. Let's go clockwise and talk about the bullet items here. So knobs or raises in main structure. Here's another one of these prongs or protrusions sticking out. Appear to be large rotor fins. So that's in the center of the craft. A hose or tube, color black. Legs or landing gear pods, probably retracted in the bottom of the craft. Blue, electric blue. He talks about portholes. This is a police officer that saw this. Main part of object, silver in color. George Wheeler, bottom right-hand sketch. This is what was discussed within the newspaper clipping. This is Ledger Telegram, May 14th, 1976. This is all at night. And when he got to kind of like this plateau area looking down, he saw this craft approaching his vehicle. And this is what it looked like. So illustration by Joel Payne. Object made a whooshing as it left. That's interesting. A paddle wheel-like apparatus was seen in the center of the vehicle. Officer Wheeler could see the outline of shadowy figures inside the craft. And then he said, "Get me to a radio. I've been hit by a blast of light." So he was calling to other police officers to get him out of there. He was horrified about what he saw. Next one, Phelps Dodge Smelter Plant, and this is in Arizona. This is October 23rd, 1980. This is not a nighttime sighting. This is a noontime sighting because it said they were on lunch break. So we're talking about 12 noon here. And this craft hovered over the top of the smokestack from the smelting plant and shining a beam of light down to the top of the smokestack. This is a blow up, gives you an idea of what that may have looked like. And this is in Arizona, daytime sighting, multiple witness report. UFO over copper smelter. This is the APRO Bulletin, volume 29, number 7. They go into this case in great detail. Some of the detailed drawings on the bottom of the craft. This is another detailed sketch of what the craft looked like. And then we've added some additional things, but still remaining historically accurate with the beam of light shining down to the top of the smokestack below. So I've got two cases of craft, for some reason, are interested in smokestacks. They're also interested in bodies of water, nuclear reactors, research centers, military locations, Air Force bases, ICBM nuclear missile silos. They have a certain interest in those type of locations. So here's our full color rendering. This gives you an idea of what this may have looked like at the smelting plant in Arizona. Now, we want to revisit this case, talked about it before, but we've got some new information. This is Cash Landrum, December 29th, 1980, Huffman, Texas. You've got 3 people going down the road at night around 9:30 p.m. Betty Cash is the driver of the vehicle. Vicki Landrum is off to the right side on the passenger side. Colby Landrum, 6 years old at the time, he's in the back seat. And it's about 9:30 p.m. at night. They're driving home. It was Colby Landrum that originally saw a light approaching the vehicle. Once it got within the vicinity, the whole localized area completely lit up. Again, this is December 29th, 1980, Huffman, Texas. And then this was not just a white light. This was a 90-foot tall double ice cream cone vehicle, basically put together at the midsection with circular porthole windows that were lighted wrapped around the outer circumference of the craft itself. Let me move on to the next slide here. Here are the primary eyewitnesses. You got Vicki Landrum, Betty Cash, Colby Landrum. Let's move on. Now, once the craft parked itself in front of the vehicle, did not land, but parked itself about 150 feet in front of the vehicle, Betty Cash slammed on the brakes, causing Vicki Landrum to go forward, and she basically put her hands on the dash pad of the vehicle, and her hand marks were melted into the dash pad of the vehicle, right along the instrument panel here, which I think is very interesting. So it's definitely a CE1 and it's a CE2. Now, there was an intense beeping sound heard by all three witnesses. So at this point, Betty Cash gets out of the vehicle. She basically walks toward the front hood of the vehicle and was looking at this craft bobbing up and down. Every time the craft would bob down, there was a blue colored flame that came out from the bottom, causing it to come back up again. This happened multiple times while there's a beeping noise that could be a proximity indicator. Eventually, Betty Cash walks back toward the driver's side door. She reaches down to open up the door handle and she burns her hand. She actually had to take the basically bottom leather part of her jacket, use that as an insulator, and then she lifted up the handle, got inside. Now, once she got inside, and this is December 29th, 1980, so it's cold outside, it was boiling hot within the vehicle. She had to turn the air on. About 3 minutes later, once the craft had departed, all three witnesses reported and counted no less than 23 double rotor Chinook CH-47 helicopters with spotlights chasing after this vehicle. Let me move on to the next slide here. And this is my AI rendering that gives you a real good idea of what this case looked like back on December 29th, 1980. And this is one of those cases that went all the way to the top. Was featured on Unsolved Mysteries years ago, but they did a real good segment on this particular case. The double ice cream cone configuration is actually called a rhombus. A rhombus is a quadrilateral whose four sides all have the same length. So perhaps that's the configuration that we're dealing with here. Now, this is the original map by John Schuessler. I cleaned this up. This gives you a real good idea. You can see X marks the spot where the craft did not touch down, but hovered over that X mark. Betty Cash's vehicle is 150 feet north on this map. And you can see the arrows give you the flight path of the vehicle. What you're looking at here is a actual photograph of where the craft came down. Now, there's a couple things I want to mention on this particular case. Number one is the different varieties of helicopters that we're seeing. So we've got 23 double rotor Chinook CH-47s. We've got 2 UH-1 crew. We've got 1 Sikorsky Skycrane that has a crew of 3. When we put this all together, you've got 3 witnesses. You've got 76 additional military witnesses that have never come forward. Where are these pilots and crew members of these helicopters? They know what went on during that night. Now, I want to highlight John Schuessler. He's the principal investigator. He gets credit for doing all the legwork on this case. Done an absolutely stellar job here. Newspaper clippings. Multiple newspaper clippings on this case. Florida Today, December 4th, 1983. Site of incident. This is another one, Clarion Ledger, December 25th, 1983. John Schuessler is at the bottom right. He's the principal investigator. Now, one thing I want to talk about is, and this came directly from John, he said that about 2 weeks after this event took place, the Army Corps of Engineers came down and they dug up where it left a burn mark on the pavement. They dug up the pavement, they repaved it, and then John Schuessler said 2 weeks later, the Army Corps of Engineers came back, they dug it up a second time, and they repaved it a second time. So something significant happened in this case. This is the Times, December 25th, 1983, another one that goes into great detail on this particular case. This is the blow up, and you can imagine what this may have looked like. 9:30 p.m. December 29th, 1980, Huffman, Texas. Now, within a matter of minutes of all three witnesses going home, they suffered from the severe effects of radiation poisoning. Now, I won't go into all of the different effects that took place, but let's just talk about what Betty was experiencing immediately after this event took place. Swollen eyes, vision impaired, stomach pains, vomiting, diarrhea, anorexia, loss of energy, scarring, hair loss. This happened to basically all three witnesses here. So we want to talk about what happened to them and then what happened next. I found it very interesting that the United States Air Force was very interested in buying Betty's car. If there's nothing to this case, why is the Air Force wanting to buy Betty's car? Did they want to conceal every bit of evidence dealing with the case? That's my question. Now, the witnesses actually sued the United States government for $20 million. U.S. sued for $20 million in damages. However, according to the judge, there was not enough evidence to support the claims of the witnesses. So the entire case was thrown out of court. It never made it to courts, which is very sad. Let's continue on. Phoenix Lights. This is March 13th, 1997, on a Thursday. Actual sightings took place Henderson, Nevada. So it wasn't just Phoenix, Arizona, but actually took place earlier in Henderson, Nevada. This shows you the whole flight path of the vehicle, starting from Nevada all the way down to Tucson. So this is a multi-state, multi-sighting report. USA Today, June 18th, 1997. The incident over Arizona was the most dramatic I've seen, says Peter Davenport of the National UFO Reporting Center in Seattle, in Washington. He brands most UFOs reports as hogwash, but not this one. What we have here, he says, with conviction, is the real thing. They are here. Just go over a couple of things here. Arizona Republic, June 20th, 1997. CNN ran a long piece throughout the day on its regular network and every half hour on CNN headline news. So this case went all the way to CNN. It was reported all around the world. Basically, newspaper clippings took place almost a month after the event, which I thought was very interesting. So what did the witnesses report? They reported an absolutely massive boomerang-shaped craft with beaming spotlights coming down that was at least 1,000 to a mile across back in 1997. This is an illustration I put together that gives you an idea of what the eyewitnesses reported here. Now, what's not talked about very much is that there were two F-16s that were scrambled from Luke Air Force Base. They had lantern pods below their wings, and they got this whole thing on videotape. They've got motion picture film of this event, which has never been released. So you can see the two F-15 pilots are trying to intercept this boomerang-shaped craft over Phoenix. Here's a little bit more of a detailed rendering, give you an idea what that may have looked like. And then we want to do a quick update here on Hudson Valley boomerang, again, 1983 to 1989. We've got 25,000 witnesses that reported a boomerang-shaped craft with multicolored lights on the bottom of it, transparent panels with tubes, pipes, and cylinders. This is a report from one of the witnesses. I don't think this has been seen for well over 40 years. March 24th, 1983, Taconic State Parkway. The witness was driving along the Taconic State Parkway, and she stopped her vehicle. She pulled off to the shoulder. There was a boomerang-shaped craft that hovered over her vehicle that had multiple colored lights on the bottom of the craft. You can see her original drawing here. So let's go to a detailed drawing by my good friend Rudy Gardea. And this is what we came up with. This gives you a real good idea of what the craft looked like. Now, this thing was hovering directly above her vehicle. She did not get out of the car, but she looked up and saw the craft itself. Let me go to the full color rendering that gives you an idea of what this craft may have looked like back in 1983. So I want to give credit to Rudy for doing the original sketch. Quick update here on January 5th, 2000. This is Southern Illinois. And you've got very interesting case from a police officer. This is his original sketch. This is Craig Stevens. And what did he see? This is reported in Republic Times Tribune, January 12th, 2000. It says, officer says he is 98% sure object was experimental or military. This thing was huge. It was moving like a blimp from south at about 500 to 1,000 feet above the ground. I could only hear a very low decibel buzzing sound. This is what he reported. So if we look at the drawing that he provided, and then exactly what he talked about, which I think is very interesting. He says, quote, the craft tried to camouflage itself against the night sky and was projecting the star field above it on the underside. So they were using star field camouflage on the bottom of the vehicle, which allowed an image above the craft to be electronically transferred under the bottom of the craft, allowing it to blend in with the background. That's exactly what's being used here. So here is the drawing by Rudy that shows you the constellations on the bottom of the craft that are allowing it to blend in with the background. Here's our full color rendering. This gives you an idea of what this may have looked like on the night of January 5th, 2000 by Officer Craig Stevens. Invisible Aircraft, Popular Science. This is May 1997. They go into great detail on the electrochromic panels that electrically transfer an image behind the craft up to the forward section, allowing it to blend into the background. So the technology for this exists for many years now. Belgium Triangle sighting, November 29th, 1989, sun, July 23rd, 1991. So we've got thousands of witnesses in Belgium back in 1889 and 1990. The Belgian Air Force scrambled F-16s, and they got a real good look at this on the radar. Visually, they didn't get this close, but what was reported from witnesses on the ground was a white light at each corner. There were tubes, pipes, and cylinders on the bottom of the vehicle, and there was a amber color light that detached from the bottom of the craft, circled around, then reattached, and then the craft flew away at a low rate of speed. So here we've got a kind of a world exclusive. This gives you a 45-degree look-down angle on one of these TR-3B black triangles that may have been associated with the Belgium Triangle sighting, 1989 to 1990. And I want to give credit to my good friend, Joe, for doing a great job on this. Maintenance technician prepares the TR-3B for a flight test at Area 51. This is about a 50-degree angle looking down. Joseph Wraith gets credit for this one. This is about an eye view of this particular case that shows you what the magnetic field disruptor would look like at the bottom central portion of the craft itself. Now, I think we've got time for one more here. This is August 25th, 1990, Barnsley, England. Primary eyewitness was with his wife. They just exited a Fleetwood Mac concert. They're going down the road at night, and then emerging from a dark cloud comes this black triangle, at least 100 feet per side, that had an indented section on the bottom. There's a white light at each corner. And then the primary eyewitness made a very interesting statement. Now you can see the crossbeam and girder construction on this indented section. You can see the windows. And then I'm going to go to what his statement is here. He says the side of the craft appear to have several illuminated windows, and I saw 2 to 3 figures that appear to be human. Certainly nothing about the figures made me think they were anything other than human, reinforcing my belief that the craft was a military project. So here we have the witness that's a 30-year police veteran, trained eyewitness. He believes that this is man-made. He does not believe this is an extraterrestrial craft. So here is Joseph's full color rendering, and you can see these humans looking back at them. Here it is in flight with the blow up with the crossbeam and girder construction. And then I want to do one more blow up that shows you what these humans may have looked like that were looking back at the primary eyewitness. So in this presentation, I just wanted to give a brief overview of some of the new cases from the APRO files, and I wanted to preserve an important part of our national history by making these cases come alive through the use of detailed drawings, sketches, and full color renderings. And I want to thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Michael. If you have anybody in our audience, if you have any questions, please feel free to go ahead and type it in the chat, and I'll relay it to Michael. And that was a lot, Michael. I just have to say for myself, that was a lot of like new, very interesting information you've relayed to us. A lot of it eye opening, and I do commend you for your detailed research and also your enthusiastic presentation. Let me see if I can try to find some questions in regards to the your presentation. I'm very still like very interested in how like you make that connection to all of the cross beams and girders.
Right.
In a lot of this, a lot of the sightings, especially like the triangles, like the one that we've experienced here in Danbury and Bethel, for the Hudson Valley sightings during the 80s. Do you think it could be man-made? I mean, like I know you've made a pretty good case in regards to it, but has there any, like, aside from some of the sketches and reports, is this something that has been acknowledged by, like, say, like, one of our defense contractors? I'm not going to name names. I don't want to name names, but if you've heard of anything in terms of like, hey, yeah, this is definitely one of ours.
Well, certainly the defense contractors aren't going to show their hand, right? They're not going to show their cards, what they're concealing. But all I do is I look at the witnesses, the military reports, what the primary eyewitnesses are telling us. So they're telling us that these craft are tested on Thursday nights. They have tubes, pipes, and cylinders on the bottom of the craft. These craft emit a low frequency electrical humming noise like a transformer or a sewing machine. There's multicolored lights that go off in sequence. And when you put this all together, it's screaming a man-made technology. It's not screaming ET in a lot of the cases. However, Linda will be the first to tell us that these sightings date back to the mid to early 1800s. She's got cases going back to the early 1900s. A lot of these cases were long before defense contractors were even, active at that time. So I'm not saying that everything is man-made, not by a long shot, but I'm saying that there's a significant majority of these that could be man-made, but there is a contingent of sightings that represent the core value and core basis for this phenomenon as being something other than man-made.
Great. We have a question from Seth. In your research, have you come across sightings or experiences from Native American communities?
Not too much on Native American communities. No, not too much. Not very much. So I just have to be honest. I haven't run across that too much.
Gotcha. We have another question in regards to the Phoenix Lakes. Thank you for bringing up the F-15s. I can't remember when I heard about these pilots describing these giant objects. Do you have any idea where to find out more about this, or where it has been talked about in the past?
Yeah, I would read Lynn Katai's book. She describes that in great detail. And what's not talked about very often is that, and this has been confirmed by Jim Delatoso, that when the F-15s landed back at Luke Air Force Base, one of the ground crew members came up to one of the pilots, and that pilot was absolutely so shocked and horrified by what he saw, he had to be, quote unquote, helped out of the cockpit because he was so shook up by what he saw. So if there's nothing to this Phoenix Lights sighting, why was this F-15 pilot so horrified and shocked about what he saw? This has been confirmed by Jim Delatoso.
Wow. Wow, that's great. That's great, like, just firsthand,
Hmm.
a
Yep.
pilot being shook so badly that he had to be
Yes.
helped out of a
That's
airplane,
right.
not even during peacetime,
That's
it's like
right.
he didn't
That's
have,
right.
like, any sort of, like, trauma or anything like that, and he had, like, some sort of, like, severe malfunction.
Right.
But, how pilots are trained and how they're, used to, their environment, this probably was something of, great note in this, particular case. Question from Brandon, in the Flatwoods, West Virginia incident, the same as the Flatwoods monster cryptid? Just heard about this past summer.
What's the question?
Is it that the monster, the Flatwood monster, is the same as the cryptid that like I think he's heard about this in the past summer. I'm not sure if it's a
Mm,
cryptid or is it like something extraterrestrial. Have you heard a difference, a distinction between the two?
Well, Mrs. May plus the six witnesses describe basically what's illustrated in Frank Ficino's book. So this is a 12-foot tall, 4 feet in diameter, with a section that is a conical portion that tapers to the large port on the bottom. You've got you could call it an acorn or more of a spade-shaped helmet. Now, according to Frank Ficino, there was other witnesses that saw the midsection lifted off of the bottom section, which had some type of a reptilian being. So was it a covering for something inside? We don't know exactly for sure, but I would recommend picking up a copy of Frank Ficino's new book on the case. Yep.
So thank you, Michael. That's a great recommendation. We should all pick it up. Another question from Seth. Thank you. I'm a huge fan of yours and appreciate your work. Would you be coming out with more Dark Files books? Your CAD renderings are fantastic. Will you be
Well,
any of
I
those?
can't take,
Any type
yeah,
of book, or maybe possibly prints that could be, purchased from the public from, say, like your website?
I can't take credit for all of it because I've had people all around the world help me. So I can't take credit for all of it. Now, AutoCAD drawings, yeah, most of that is all mine. But when it comes to the very detailed full color renderings, I've had people from all across the country help me out. There could probably be enough information to do a book too on Dark Files because I just got done looking through all the AirPro files, which have thousands of more reports in there. So there's definitely enough for a book too. But as far as what's available now, um, I was involved in writing a book called Disclosure and Illustrated History. This is with Dr. Stephen Greer, and that book is now available. That has eyewitness testimony, it has side-by-side comparison, it has historical cases, and it has UFO crash retrievals. So that's something that's available now.
Excellent. Thank you, Michael. Anyone else have any questions before we wrap up here? Just want to remind everyone that we have our next presentation coming up this Wednesday. It's with Peter Robbins, and it's going to be mostly about the disclosure hearings at the UN back in the late 70s. So I think you touched upon that in your presentation as well, Michael. So I thank you, for doing that, because that's going to be a big topic of interest for a lot of us, because a lot of us don't know too much about that, and I'm one of them. I really don't know, you know, the overall information regarding what do you say, like a symposium or meeting at the UN regarding
Mhm.
UFOs back in the 70s. So that's a big deal. And I know that also Tom Reed also had something going on, a letter or so or sorts, towards the 1978 meeting at the UN regarding UFOs. So if that is it, I thank you all for
Okay.
joining us on the third day of our Western Connecticut UFO conference. Again, thank you, Michael Schratt. You have been an
Mhm.
invaluable presenter for our conference, and as always, you always have an open invite to be in all future conferences being held here at the Danbury Library. And to all of you, thank you for joining us on your Saturday. Get out there and enjoy yourselves. See you next time.
Okay. Thanks a lot. Yep. Let's see.